Welcome to Breakthrough Spotlight. My name is Suzanne Herrera Lipuma, and I am the ACLS Leading Edge Fellow and Visiting Scholar at Breakthrough, a nonprofit organization that uses media, arts, and tech to advance gender equity, racial justice, LGBTQ+, and immigrant rights. I encourage you to visit our website, letsbreakthrough.org, to learn more about our media campaigns, and you can follow us on Instagram at Breakthrough TV. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, New York, which is on the unceded homeland of the Lenape people. Today here we are joined by Katie Pe Benito, and welcome, Katie. We're so pleased to have you with us.
Hi, Suzanne, and thank you for the invitation to be in conversation with you. Thank you to everyone tuning in or watching after the fact. My name is Katie Pe Benito. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, to be referred to in the third person, and I'm also on unceded Lenape land. To share a self-description, I'm a Filipinx white agender person with long black hair. I'm wearing a chartreuse green sweater layered with a floral green and red button down, and I'm seated at my work desk in front of a brick wall that is my background. I'm very grateful to be a part of this Breakthrough Spotlight series following the last guest you had, Sonia Ginyansaka. Their words and their presence as a performer has inspired me and sustained my own work that can be difficult at times. And as another they, them, Sonia also shows me it's possible to be recognized and respected by my pronouns. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. So as an introduction to all of you who haven't yet met Katie, you're going to meet them today. Katie is an interdisciplinary arts worker and caregiver navigating access and dismantling dominator culture, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. They represent their past, present, and future selves alongside their chosen family and greater communities through art making and cultural organizing as a channel for recollection, self-respect, pleasure, and healing. They were a 2019 fellow of the EmergeNYC Arts Program, and they are featured in the 2021 publication, We Are Here, Visionaries of Color, Transforming the Art World. Yes! Had to show it, had to show it. Oh, awesome! Yes. By Jasmin Hernandez of Gallery Gurls. They have shared their performances, videos, and installation projects internationally, including at the Gallery of Modern Art and David Dale Gallery in Glasgow, Scotland, the Abrons Arts Center, Knockdown Center, Performance Space, New York, and the Queen's Museum, among many others. KT is also a facilitator and an award manager at the arts nonprofit Queer Art, a collective member of Vox Populi Gallery, and a Philadelphia chapter member of Anak Bayan USA, a transnational youth-led grassroots organization campaigning for land sovereignty and national democracy in the Philippines. Katie, again, we're just so grateful and excited to have you here with us today. So about the series of conversations, we're exploring with artists how storytelling can be a transformative act, and we're especially interested in investigating how artists reimagine both storytelling and its transformative potential. So really simple questions, like what is a story? How can the act of telling a story transform oneself and be transformative to community, which are simple, but actually quite elaborated processes. And we're also just really curious, especially turning to artists who can share the multiple creative and embodied forms storytelling can take. So all the different and diverse formats, sonic, audio, visual, tactile, media, through place, setting, and gathering. And especially in today's conversation, how arts and performance, care work, and activism are woven together and take shape in KT's transformative multidisciplinary practice. So I learned about your work. I was hoping we might start with your installation at the Queen's Museum called Entries to Faustino, which in some way is a storytelling work. And so maybe we could see an image of that, and then we could just talk a little bit about it as a starting point.
For sure, yeah.
Amani, if you had that first image of installation. So maybe we could just start by, this was such a layered act of storytelling, mapping, kind of 3D collage. and created in a process that was substantial work and care work involved. So can you talk about a little bit about this project and how did it come about?
Yeah, so thank you for like the full introduction and like kind of like reorienting me again with like the Spotlight series itself. I just love to think of this piece as like that work of storytelling. It's very nonlinear. I think on our planning call, I was like, I kind of see it as a mess, but like in this organized way. But yeah, this project this installation in particular began from like a solo vacation trip I took to California in 2017, where my extended relatives live. That's like the beginning of like my migration story, right, from my lineage, from my Philippine lineage. And so I was visiting my Auntie Caroline Paras, the niece of my paternal grandmother. And she has a lot of like the Pe Benito family history in her home. And she like had all these photo albums that she was going through with me that I'd never really seen before. And so she's sharing this with me as an adult, as opposed to like when I was a child and traveling with my parents. So like there's a lot of stuff that, you know, like the elders in your family aren't really going to share with like an 8-year-old who's visiting, you know? So,
Exactly.
Yeah, right. We're just going to put all the family drama onto this like young child who's still trying to figure it out. Not so, but this family vacation trip, or like this vacation trip for myself. Yeah, I think it was like the first time that I was receiving a majority of my Filipino family history in one sitting. And so I was journaling and drawing a lot to remember that moment, what it was like to be in my Auntie Caroline's home, looking through all these photo albums, being with the Paras Pe Benito family altar, and what it means to grieve and celebrate those who have passed on. I also made a note, like, you know, we cooked together and we joked together about Filipino American identity, about me being Filipino and white. And I didn't really have space to joke about that growing up. Like I grew up in Portland, Oregon, like predominantly white. So, you know, it's like developing that lexicon hasn't really come to me until I moved to New York City.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an amazing moment too, when that knowledge transfer happens and it's not always something that's planned or that you see in advance, but that's amazing that this project came out of that moment. We are going to go through some of the images, but if you can kind of talk us through some of some of the pieces of the installation, like that came out of that. You said you were journaling and that there were drawings that came out of it. And then there were also some physical pieces. Do you want to talk a little bit about what some of the other elements were?
Yeah, sure. So, right, these are some of the like photos of my Inang Lola Fastina Pascua that were in those photo albums. It's like pictures of like, right, my dad and his sister. And I think there was like maybe one image that I had of her growing up. So like to see this in 2017, I'm like, wow, like I see her in the Philippines. I see her in her house, and just kind of like printing them on printer paper, because that's like what's around. And I feel like that's something with the source of these materials. Like, I'm trying to think of like maybe what's the most expensive thing that I had to purchase for this pegboard. Maybe the pegboard itself, when I went to like a lumber yard to get it. But for the most part, it's like I just really wanted to think about like how these objects, like we've come into knowing like around people's houses, or we've seen in these stores. Like I made note of like, right, like these objects I sourced from just these shops that are along like the 7 train in Queens, which I used a lot in my commute when I was living in Long Island City and, you know, commuting back and forth on that train line. And then like all of these drawings and writings, photos, and letters, they're just kind of like pulled together intuitively from, I think, a lot of stuff that I just collected throughout the years. So I think like the oldest thing may have been like 2011, where I was really working through something in like my late teen years. Yeah, this one in particular, I know like when I shared this in conversation with a talk I had at the Brooklyn Museum, it really resonated with Lauren Zelaya, like mom knows best, but your auntie may know more. And like a play on that idiom being that like, my mom's the one who's white in my family, and she doesn't have a lot of like Filipino knowledge and history to steward to me, but like my auntie definitely did. You know, when I went to go visit her, like she was the one giving me a lot of this like oral history and tradition transmission that, you know, my mom didn't know best on how to raise me as like a Filipino whatever gender it is right now. But yeah, I think about this one a lot with how expansive like Auntie Knowledge really is.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Yes. Yeah, we can have a whole other conversation about Auntie Knowledge. I did go to a conference earlier this year, and there's going to be a journal coming out about Auntie Knowledges. And this is I'm very excited. This is a new subject of conversation that's going. I thought of that, but yeah, it's there is like this vast network of knowledges that are not always uplifted.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we've transitioned into a new image, I wanted to like point out this one where like there's so many things happening. Like now that I like look back at this documentation, I'm like, oh yeah, there's this and this, and like I look at this.
Yeah, so tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah, image descriptions, they're so important. So it's like on this yellow pegboard backdrop, there's this like wire black basket that is holding like these small little pebble stones that you'd see in a therapist's office that says like faith, healing, respect, kindness. It's a little hokey, right? Like to see it engraved, but it's just like, who told you that it was hokey? Who told you this is like cliche? And they're really things that we should be embodying, embracing. And in that same basket, there's like Tom's liquid deodorant and rose water and agua de Florida, like just these different things that help us in our daily lives, like to either feel center grounded, ritualistic. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like, why am I putting on deodorant? It's not like anybody can smell me, but it is a part of my ritual. It's like, it's just one of the things. And so that basket, funnily enough, it's like, there's this piece of brown paper that's underneath it, and it's actually being like, what is it? The pressure of the basket against the pegboard is actually what's holding it up. So like it's very tenuously held, but it's an illustration of me interviewing my dad.
Okay. Yeah, I can see it's like in a graphite or crayon tape illustration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like these little things that like, I don't know if there aren't many other context clues that I could give other than like, I'm talking about it after the fact, or I'm walking someone through the pegboard itself, which is also a beautiful thing about all of this is like storytelling. Like if you know these images, you know them. Like this illustration that's above the basket is Lapu Lapu, who is indigenous to the Visayas in the Philippines, and he's recognized as like a pre-colonial Philippine hero because he resisted Spanish colonization. I'm sure we're familiar with Ferdinand Magellan crossing through trying to colonize the world, but he stopped in the Philippines, and he was met by by indigenous Filipinos who ultimately killed him. And it's like one of the best things that I can share when it comes to like my other organizing work. It's like we've always resisted. So yeah, I was like, an homage. I'm like, I can just draw these heroes and like they can be remembered through these places.
Yeah, and I love that also that drawing kind of creates this other storytelling space that, in a way, I think about images of the past and that there's not always photographs, or there's not always, maybe you don't always even you're not sure what the one representation is. So I love the act of, you kind of in a way transcribed a visual story into, this drawing that's for you. And then right below that on the same paper in the same format is also your presence with your dad doing the interviewing, like in putting those in some ways are telling also a different story of like the story that these drawings are laying out, not in a linear way, but just that they're near each other in conversation. Yeah,
exactly. Oh my goodness, this one. So this is also on the pegboard. It's like, it was kind of held up by a clipboard, and this is like the front and the back of a flyer that I'd made. I wrote a longer description about this one, but basically it's like a huge hand with like these press-on long nails that say "fuck Donald Trump" on them. This work was made in the Trump years. Should have also introduced with that. So there's also like a way of being like, I just need to like establish some sort of like this isn't a moment like I'm arriving at this point of like Filipinx cultural identity formation by way of like such an oppressive government, and the way that I think a lot of people were organizing in their different ways around it. So through like a flyer, like the way that we kind of see many flyers being disseminated around today, digitally, in person, through many many eras of activism. I had a couple versions of this, but this flyer gets into like, right, the large hands, me like misspelling Philippines so many times, like not like really like not knowing much of like my Filipino identity and the stuff that mattered to me, but that now matters to me when I was growing up. But you'll see like then there's like screenshots of like of like my inbox, and I like Patagonia, like the clothing company. They just like have the most clickbait titles, and there is this one that was like your public lands are under threat, and so I just like screenshot that, like repeated it, and then there's another one that I got from Patagonia too that says like the president stole your land, defend the land that you have left. And then the image below it, what you were saying about like having images of these people that you may not know them, or like they may not be remembered through photos. This is the depiction of Lapu-Lapu killing Ferdinand Magellan. So it is that connection between like a president stealing your land, a resistance of defending the land that you have left. And yeah, just on the other side, a friendly reminder that Trump is a fascist and so is Duterte. And this is in reference to President Rodrigo Duterte, who was elected in 2016. And the Philippine elections are coming up next year. So the Philippines are currently in that process of, if you remember a year ago during the US presidential election, that sort of anxiety, they're going through that now. In the way of like, it's possible that this fascist president may rig the election and continue to be president. And there's like a little like quote at the bottom by President Rodrigo Duterte where he says like, I will follow America since they say that I am an American boy. Okay, granted, I will admit that I am a fascist. I will categorize you already as a terrorist. So he's if you just look at a few articles about this guy, like there's just so many ways that he's just like socially like incorrect or just like saying the wrongest things, but then also his actions through the you can say like you could be a liberal and like say like the right things, but then be doing the wrong things through your actions. But he's just saying the wrong things, doing the wrong things. And so that's why I'm also part of Anak this in essence entries to Faustina, growing out of colonialism for my grandmother's sake, really pushed me to be like, you need to get involved with something. Like it really sparked something inside of me to be like, I haven't really been in leadership in an organization or like have really been in one long term, but I've just been making like a lot of different artworks, performances to just amplify like what it is that I'm seeing, to make it firm within myself, to just connect all that I'd learned and received from my auntie and be like, oh, it's connected to all of these like political international issues. Like it is all connected. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the pegboard in a way puts that into like a kind of visual language that of your process of the storytelling and making those visual connections between specific personal histories, these kind of everyday moments of like, I don't know how to call it, maybe like slightly commodified political knowledge, or, and then just the intensity of like an overtly violent political discourse and political reality being like kind of all juxtaposed, but then that there in some ways I think one of the things about storytelling is that it can hold in solution so many of the different contradictions of our daily lives, or of like these flows of time and history. And I was so appreciative of how this board puts together the personal and the intimate registers with the bigger histories in a way that kind of conveys that dissonance, that those registers are just right at the same moment. But yeah, I have so many questions, but I'm trying it. I know you were thinking, I mean, we were talking about the format of the board as a way of thinking about like nonlinear storytelling or story maps, and that can have a power of it can tell stories in a different way. And I didn't know if you wanted to say something about your affinity for that kind of nonlinear.
Yeah, I mean, like, as somebody who lives with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, like, stuff is coming cyclically. Like, I'm repeating the same things. Things are just like flashing at me when it comes to like telling these sort of stories. I feel like even in our conversation, I'm just like having a thought that comes up, and I'm just like, let's just finish one thought, go into the other. But like on the pegboard, I'm just like, I'm saying like over 17 things at once, and it resonates with maybe the person standing in front of it, and it's been remarkable. And I'm so grateful, I think, of like all the friends and peers in my life who have and family. My parents got to see it in person. My mom had questions about about Mom Knows Best, and just like, but recognizing like, you know, getting that feedback of like, you know, some things don't make sense to some of my peers and friends, and I'm like, oh, okay, so I can walk you through that. But then some people are just like, that hit me right there. Like, I knew what that was about, and I was telling my family about it. Like, I was phoning them, I was taking pictures, and I'm just like, I love that that not only like it's making sense to the people who are seeing it in person, but they feel moved to like share it with their parents, sharing these stories about like how colonialism has affected the Philippines with their parents and their grandparents. Like, I'm just like, the power of art, truly, like that you can like you can be presented with something, and that's how you get into the conversation. Because I don't know, like, I mean, it's my style now, but like, I don't know how easy it is to just engage with a parent and be like, so like, what are your thoughts on colonialism and white supremacy?
Like, and like, as it relates to our specific family history, or something that doesn't get talked about, or yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what dinner is like the good dinner time to sort of like launch that conversation, but also when you have something to share, when you say like, I saw this story, and that led me to questions about, you know, our story, or someone we know's story. That is a very different kind of like portal and connection, and something. Yeah, I think we had talked about this when we spoke before, but there is something about the pegboard and the installation that can, in a way, hold space for those conversations, and can prompt them without necessarily having. There's like an openness to it saying 17 things at once, and offering many different registers for entry point, like verbal, nonverbal, tactile. The rose water, I hadn't seen the rose water, so like smell is in there very profoundly. Yeah. I like all the just all those different pieces. I think you've talked a little bit about, and I really appreciate in your writing about this piece and other, you know, talk like writing and talks about this piece. You've commented on both that it is a piece of care work, and also that there was like self-care as part of art making in general, and then of course like this as part of that practice. And I know that care work is just a part of what you both like work on and think about, and so I would just love to hear, just invite your any like thoughts or comments you wanted to share about that.
Sure. I know, I feel like whenever it comes to like asking people to share their stories, I'm just getting a glare, I'm gonna like throw it up my head. But anytime that there's like, right, the initiative to like share a story or convey a story from a diaspora, or like as a descendant, there is so much of a responsibility to do it with care and with accreditation. I've been thinking about, right, like care work in that way, like that we pay homage to those who have set the path before us, and that I continue to like work alongside, stand on the shoulders of. And yeah, I feel like it's the spaces in between that matter a lot, and where you receive those profound stories and lessons and teachings, rather than just like, I don't know, like the prophetic message that like the preacher says at the pulpit. It's like, yeah, to use the very like, religious route. But I feel like, right, it's in kitchen spaces, and when we break bread, and right, like when you are interviewing someone, asking for consent, preparing a meal for them, doing aftercare work, like doing something like taking a walk with them, and just like it's sustaining. Like, yeah, I just think of like, these stories are really difficult to hold and to engage with and to revisit. And through my organizing work, I do a lot of like just education of like that runs through the history of pre-colonial Philippines to present day and issues. And it's not easy. Like, I feel like, right, in the same way that I received my family history, it wasn't like bits and pieces. And then my auntie was just like, this is everything. And I'm like, oh, it is everything. And in a similar way, right, it's like through this educational model that I'm doing with Anak Bayan, it's like, here is everything that our people have been through. And you live with that. And I'm like, all right, we do live with this. And that's why it's just like, I do have to take care of myself, prioritizing like this one body that I get in this lifetime, making the work sustainable. Even though, you know, we got to work with the urgency of like, this should have been done yesterday. But yeah, thank you for asking that. I feel like I just like don't put enough thought into how to speak about care work, but also like, it's been, I don't know, it's what I speak about being like a caregiver, and I'm like, how do I speak to it? But I'm just like, it's kind of been like also expected of me. You know, I was born into this body where people are like, all right, so you're going to babysit the kids when you're a kid. And like I think I like started babysitting when I was 11. And it's a little wild to just think of like, oh, this might be my life if I decide to have children. And, you know, just like being a caregiver and not like centering myself along the way. But I find that it's also very profound to give back and to receive. I think that's a really big lesson I've gotten.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you naming and elaborating all of the forms of care work, and also the ways that, because care, it is just like an invisibilized form of labor, and devalued form of labor often, and that there, I mean, I think some of the things you mentioned are also, there are spaces of like such embodied beauty or joy, like those little moments in the kitchen, or like those moments when you're making tea for someone, is like a way of, yeah, sustaining your body while you're having a conversation, but also having a connection, taking a walk, or that, of course, there are many other forms of care work, and it's very vast, but I think I appreciate you kind of even just bringing those scenes into the mind, and yeah, narrating them, because that those kinds of spaces and that kind of work is not foregrounded or also honored as a creative act, and also as a political act, and as a labor, as a laboring act that also deserves its own like rest or recompense or reciprocity, and that care work is, you know, reciprocal across time and space, or like we, you know, caring for one another, that yeah, that care work yeah, like enters into a circuit of yeah, like a circuit of caring. So yeah, thank you for, I just I really appreciated hearing you talk about it. We've talked a little bit about Anak Bayan, like here and there, but yeah, I would just love for you to tell us a little bit about that organizing. I think we might have an image or two, and yeah, just sharing a little bit of your experience. And I think you've written about this, right? So maybe you're going to share some of your writing.
Yes.
You can tell us a little bit about the writing and how you started writing about it. Another form of storytelling, right? Like telling
Absolutely.
your political story.
Yeah, thank you. Right. So I recently moved to Philadelphia after living in New York City for 8 years. And I had been involved with attended different events with Anak Bayan New York chapter. But there was a Philly chapter that actually began in June 2020, where I feel like a lot of people's activisms really bloomed and flourished, but also in a very like traumatic way, like we were retaliating. But while the organization here, this chapter began in June 2020, the grassroots organization has been around since 1998 and works in coalition with other grassroots organizations like Bayan, International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, Migrante, Gabriela, Malaya Movement, Kabataan Alliance, and Kilusang May Uno, amongst many others. And they're based in the Philippines, they're based in the US. So it really is like transnational organizing. And I think this era of like people organizing online, like I've been working to, I'm just like keeping documents always, but like I've started to push into writing autobiographical fiction about it, while being careful, of course, like, you know, these are organizations that are being targeted by the Philippine government. Like, I have to be mindful of like what I'm exposing. Like, I would really, like, I'm working to write an autobiographical fiction to help the movement and to promote these campaigns, but I don't want to do it at the expense of my kasamas. Kasama is also a word for like comrade, but it's also like sibling. And so it's this beautiful fusion that we also address each other within. So yeah, like I said earlier, like entries to Faustina really helped me realize like I needed to be in this movement work. And I want to just share this one piece of writing that I am currently workshopping. So if any of my peers are out in the watching, I'd love feedback on it. And I'll share a content warning that this does have mention of police violence against Indigenous communities in the Philippines. Makibaka huwag matakot. The first time I heard this phrase was in my first national call with Anak Bayan USA. All the chapters are present, along with some Philippine chapters, so the presentations become a mosh pit of Tagalog and English, and sometimes Cebuano. This national call is an emergency rally on the Save Our Schools campaign to defend the cultural education of the Lumad, people indigenous to Mindanao, Philippines. Another one of their schools was raided by the Philippine National Police. We watch a triggering video capturing the yelling, the screeches, the crying. The facilitators deliver an in-depth history of Indigenous violence in the Philippines and the current situation. And then there's an intermission to chant together. It was strange to sit alone in my room, fist raised, following along with the call and response phrase I wasn't sure how to pronounce at first. Makibaka huwag matakot. The organizers on the Zoom call encourage everyone to get on mic to chant with them. Hearing the distortion of all our voices together became its own battle cry, a glitch in the system working to hold our rage and guttural refrains. After that call, I wanted to hear Makibaka huwag matakot again. Something clicked within me with this phrase. Like many protests, there are chants that are familiar and repeated. No good cops in a racist system. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. If we don't get it, shut it down. We die. They do nothing. Stand up. Fight back. The lyrics change. The beat stays the same, and the issues are rewritten. But for the first time, I'm encountering a phrase crafted by my own people in a language I am struggling to inherit. Makibaka huwag matakot showed me that my spirit has been worrying itself with minor things and failing to continue the mural that my ancestors started painting. The oppressor will have you constantly reacting instead of imagining. If we dream ourselves out of existence, we're not going to survive. If we cannot imagine a future for ourselves, we will surely die out at the hands of a white heteropatriarchal historian. We need our elders. We need our past to plan ahead. Remember to act as you are called to. Use this privilege as a weapon in this time to call out colonialism, racism, and fascism when you encounter it, and you'll never be wrong when you speak truth to power.
Thank you, Katie. Wow. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to give, I feel like I want to just like take a minute.
Of course.
Yeah, that's a really, thank you for sharing that writing with us. And the last part you formatted in the writing is like a poem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's our affirmations. It's the stuff that like we need to be reminded. We're seeing it all the time on like the Instagram, but like you gotta say it in space. Like you have to tell it to yourself in the mirror. And I was sharing with you like right as I was logging on that I'm celebrating a very special anniversary of just like loving myself, and reading through this sort of writing where I'm just like I have to recognize like I've got multiple selves. I got the past that I'm working to steward. I've got the present that I'm working to like take care of, and then I have the future that I get to look forward to. And these other images are like the other cultural organizing work that I've done with Anak Bayan here in Philly. This was for an anniversary of the 49 years of when martial law began under Ferdinand Marcos. And so for 9 years, the Philippines was under martial law. And there are so many violences and atrocities that the people recognize and remember. Like there's a people set history about living under martial law, whereas like the Philippine government will like say otherwise. They'll say like, oh yeah, it was a great time because it was the war on drugs. Like everything was like in tip top shape and whatnot. It's like the same stuff as like the Reagan administration, and like with my work at Queer Art, I'm like so reminded of all of these activist artists who were living within the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s under that administration, and the erasure, the continued erasure. And so with reparations for martial law, there's there's so many people who just have not received due reparations for the oppression by the Philippine government. And there are like lawyers still working today to seek those stories from the families and the descendants. And right, there's a call like to never again with martial law. There was something else that I wanted to mention about Ferdinand Marcos being buried in like the hero's burial ground. And there have been recent protests about, him being exhumed and then being put into this like burial plot that is only given to people who are like heroes of the Philippines. But because of these actions, they're just right. It's like there's so much value in like revering the dead that it's like, why would you put him into these burial grounds? So that's also another thing around that. It's like you're putting all these money and resources to exhuming the body, putting it in this burial ground, and you're not going to put it towards reparations for these people who were tortured under martial law.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you for sharing that history and for the work that you're doing and that Anak Bayan and other groups are doing to, bring some measures of like justice after the fact, whatever those are, and then also to transform like what the present is. There is a line, right? There's that line in your poem. It's like can't have a future without the past. These are connected sites of resistance. Is like pushing back against both what has happened and what is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're going to ask this question, but I just wanted to mention like in tow. It's like I wish I didn't have to like tell these sort of traumatic stories around like to get people to activate or like to make people care. Like that is something else where I thought, at some point in my life, like you had to traumatize yourself and others in order to be an activist, to be an artist, but that's not sustainable. And that actually doesn't help us dream those worlds that we need to live within. So yeah, just like even just sharing those sort of things around martial law, I'm like, yeah, like I wish I didn't have to like exhume these stories, but like people need to know. And that's also why we created like, that was like an art build, like those images around it. So
yeah, you had mentioned that culture work is kind of interwoven with the Anak Bayan work, and that part of it is negotiating the ways that activism is being done by like whole embodied people who also are sustaining themselves psychically and emotionally through like working with extremely difficult material. And then also when you're dealing with a history of violence, how do you not repeat that through representation? How do you convey information without reinstantiating, or in some ways like recreating the conditions of that work? And I think that's just a very live question for any organizing and also any educational space and artistic space, is really navigating those pieces. And I think maybe, in some ways, I think entries to Faustina is a very beautiful weaving across different narratives, and that your work is finding a way of negotiating some of those like different stories while also holding up also not like erasing the entire vibrancy in life that the violence is violent against, right? Like that, that the violence, the stories of violence are not the whole story, and are not the end story or the main story. We are coming toward the end, so I just wanted to thank you so much. Is there something you want us to look forward to, or that you're working on that you want to share? I know that this organizing work is in progress. We have some links, but I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Suzanne. It's really helpful to just kind of like filter through these things when I feel like I'm just here at my computer and like I don't think about anything like of my own in the past or processing through. But yeah, I want to echo what Sonia had shared last time. Our last guest was just rest. Like you have to take care of yourself in these moments, and like you have to work with the urgency of tomorrow, but also like knowing that this must sustain like for 1,000 years. And pushing with like that sort of idea in mind. So I'm like, yeah, it's like I feel like I don't have many engagements that I am doing that are necessarily public facing, but what I was sharing about like the We Are Here book by Jasmin and Hernandez, Gallery Girls, I'll show it again. But like,
yes, please.
Can't recommend this enough. Yeah. Can't recommend this enough. Because like this came out in February of 2021, and it was a seed I planted back in 2019, before lockdown, and for it to kind of like flourish and bloom and sustain me in my home, and to look back at this and to look at so many artists who have inspired me, who are really making change in culture and art still happen. It's truly a blessing. And I'm like in touch with Jasmin, and I'm like, thank you for your encouragement with this book. Because like I remember when she asked me, I like had my doubts. I was like, why are you asking me of all people? Of all the other like legends that are in this book, and like there are the legends of the book. So I'm simply humbled that I'm like next to them. But I finally like kind of accepted that I'm just like, I have my place here, and it's not out of scarcity. Like it's not like somebody else deserves this more than me. I'm just like, yeah, it just encourages other people to remember our legacies as artists. And let's see, of the other organizing work that I wanted to share was to support the Philippine Human Rights Act. I don't know if we have a banner for that, but
I think we have some stuff we're going to put in the chat. We have some
wonderful.
links, some resource links. Yes.
Amazing. Yeah, I just want to speak on the Philippine Human Rights Act, that it's an active act in Congress. Representative Susan Wild has been pushing it forward. It's basically to suspend U.S. military funding to the Philippines because of all these human rights violations, not just, during the Marcos era, but now in like Duterte's presidential era, right? The violence that are happening against farm workers, against peasant working class people, against women, against LGBTQ plus people, against indigenous people. It's just surmounting, right? Like there are all of these military resources going to like suppressing people of the Philippines and not going to COVID response. I think that's really been like a cornerstone piece where I'm just like, oh, like all these US tax dollars that are going towards like military in the Philippines and not towards like actual health relief aid, while there are all of these countries still struggling to receive their vaccines while the US is, rolling out boosters. I'm not going to chip away at anything with that, but like, it's just, we can't talk about going back to normal or like that we're in like a post-vaccine era when there are people who have just not had access to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, and so we have the banner, and I think we're going to drop the links in the chat as well. And that is an act that folks can support and can learn more about. Mm-hmm. Katie, thank you so much. This was just really such a gift to be able to speak with you. I want to thank Amani Ju, who has been facilitating this conversation behind the scenes, doing all the tech work. and producing and prep for these episodes. Thank you so much, Amani. And I want to thank everyone who's been tuning in with us. Thank you all. This has been an episode of Breakthrough Spotlight. My name is Suzanne Herrera Lipuma, and it's been my pleasure to be in conversation with Katie Pe Benito. And as we had noted, we're putting some links to KT's website and Instagram. Please also be sure to follow Breakthrough at Breakthrough TV and stay tuned for updates on our ongoing launch to the Our Stories in Vivid Color docuseries on YouTube. And you can find that link and more information in our bio. So thank you all. Have a good evening. And thank you again, KT.
Maraming salamat. Thank you.